Albert Einstein was the greatest scientist that the world has ever known. But just as so much of so-called history has been fabricated in order to brainwash the public into believing myths that serve the parasitic controllers, so was Albert Einstein created into a mythic figure in order to support those ends. Unfortunately, many generations of trusting students have been brainwashed into believing in this fraud, and hailed Einstein as a shining example of scientific genius. He was nothing of the sort. Einstein was a total fraud. Let's take a look at his timeline. 1700 Newton predicts the deflection of light around the sun, something Einstein plagiarized as his 1911 prediction without even mentioning, much less citing, Newton. 1801 Johann Georg von Soldner publishes his predictions which Einstein plagiarizes as his own predictions 114 years later, never citing Soldner in his 1915 paper. 1827 78 years before Einstein gets credit for it, Robert Brown in Scotland explains Brownian movement, yet Einstein never even cited him. 1878 James Maxwell in Scotland publishes Special Theory of Relativity in Encyclopaedia Britannica, which Einstein then publishes as his own in 1905. Without ever even citing Maxwell, it seems incomprehensible that Einstein could have copied an article from an encyclopedia, submitted it as his own work, and never get questioned by the hundreds of professors and publishers who must have reviewed it. 1879, March 14 Einstein born in Wittenberg, Germany. 1887 Michelson-Morley experiment suggests there is no ether, an observation made by Einstein in his 1905 papers in which he never even cited Michelson or Morley. 1888 Heinrich Hertz publishes his paper on the photoelectric effect, a paper which Einstein failed to cite. 1889 George Fitzgerald in Ireland publishes his paper about the theory of relativity, a paper which Einstein never even cited, even though Fitzgerald's numerous collaborators did cite him. 1890 Ludwig Boltzmann of Austria and Josiah Gibbs of the U.S. developed the Boltzmann constant. 1892 Hendrik Lorentz in the Netherlands publishes the Lorentz transformations. 1895 At age 16, Einstein fails a simple entrance exam to an engineering school in Zurich, Switzerland. 1896 At age 17, Einstein becomes a high school dropout, his German citizenship is revoked, and he enrolls in the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich. 1898 Paul Gerber in Germany publishes the exact equations in an Allendorf-Physik, also in Science of Mechanics, a book that Einstein is known to have studied, which Einstein publishes 17 years later in 1915 as his Perihelion Motion of Mercury, in exactly the same journal, with no cites to Gerber, claiming that he was in the dark, only to confess in 1922 his crime. Under pressure. 1898 Poincare in France wrote the paper on the theory of relativity, which never mentions Einstein, which Einstein plagiarizes as one of his 1905 papers without ever citing Poincare. 1900 Max Planck and Wilhelm Wien of Germany developed the quantum theory, which Einstein plagiarizes as his light quantum paper in 1905, never even citing either Planck or Wien. 1901 At age 22, after 5 years at Swiss Federal Polytechnic School, Einstein graduates with the lowest grade point average in the class, becomes a Swiss citizen, and gets the lowest ranking position an engineer could get in the patent office, technical assistant. 1902 Einstein sires his first mental mushroom, an illegitimate daughter Lieserl, who believed to have had Down syndrome and was put up for adoption. 1903 Alincio Depreto publishes E = MC 2" at, a scientific magazine known to be read by Einstein, which he later claimed as his own work, never citing Depreto. 1904 Einstein sires his only normal child, Hans Albert, whose main claim to fame seems to have been to keep up his subscription to Applied Mechanics Review for 20 years. 1904 Friedrich Haysen Earl of Germany, citing J.J. Thomson of England and W. Kaufmann of Sweden, publishes E = MC 2 in the very same journal as Einstein plagiarizes it as his own in 1905, never citing any of the three. 1905 Philip Edward Anton von Leonard, under whom Einstein's wife studied, received a Nobel Prize for discovering the photoelectric effect, which Einstein then completely plagiarizes the same year, presenting it as his paper, with no references to Leonard. June 5, 1905, Poincare publishes Sur la dynamique de l'électron, naming the Lorentz transformations after Lorentz, and 25 days later, on June 30, Einstein, failing to even cite Poincare or Lorentz, presents it as his theory of relativity. 1905 At age 26, While still a low-level technical assistant at the Patent Office, he publishes 4 groundbreaking essays in the field of theoretical physics and quantum mechanics in an Alan der Physik, gaining him a Ph.D. from the University of Zurich and worldwide support from Zionists. He includes his wife Merity name on the papers, who is rumored to have done all his math for him, who he gave all the prize money. 1907 J. Prex says of Einstein, ridiculous twist of logic. Perhaps it will prove possible to test this theory using bodies whose energy content is variable to a high degree, for example, salts of radium. That such an experiment lies beyond the realm of possible experience. 1909 At age 30, 4 years after getting his Ph.D., this genius is still a technical assistant at the Patent Office, so World Jury arranges to promote him to associate professor at Zurich University. 1910 Einstein sires his second mental mushroom, Eduardo, who dies in a sanatorium in 1965. 1919, November 7, London Times begins the Jew disinformation campaign, heralding Einstein as a genius. 1915, November 20, David Hilbert presents his paper in Berlin, citing Marcel Grossmann, including precisely the same field equations that Einstein presents as his own equations 5 days later, 2 weeks after it was known that Einstein had received a copy of Hilbert paper and that Hilbert hadn't received a copy of Einstein paper. Dingle repudiates the special theory of relativity in 1972-1915. November 25, Einstein presents his paper and publishes the general theory of relativity based on the mathematics of Marcel Grossmann and Bernhard Riemann, first to develop a sound non-Euclidean geometry, which is the basis of all mathematics used to describe relativity. 1921 Einstein first visit to the U.S. to promote Zionism. 1922 Einstein receives a Nobel Prize concerning the photoelectric effect, something he plagiarized from Heinrich Hertz, but who Einstein never even cites. 1932, December 9, Einstein was denied a visa to visit the U.S. because of his communist connections. 1955, April 18, Einstein dies. 1972, Herbert Dingle refutes the special theory of relativity which Einstein plagiarized from him in 1915. 1993, Peter Beckmann writes that special relativity will eventually be dismissed. 1995, the Global Positioning Satellite works fine, in spite of Einsteinians' concerns that they ignored Einstein theories. 1998, December 21, Tom van Flandern publishes in Physics Letters that the speed of gravity must be at least 20 billion times faster than the speed of light, disproving Einstein theories. 1999, Time magazine puts Einstein on the front cover as Person of the Century. Even though he was an American, he was an enemy foreign agent. The American public never viewed Einstein as even one of their most favorite 100 people of the year, much less the century. And the last picture we want on our coffee tables is one of a lying, plagiarizing demagogue. 2000, Anita Renfani proves that Einstein theory about the constant speed of light is wrong. The Einstein myth has become so ingrained in popular thought that many of the current generations will be loath to part with it. It does make a terrific story. A student whom his teachers thought would not amount to anything, a sloppy dresser who abhorred wearing socks or even neatly combing his hair, should later be revealed to be the greatest scientist of all time. A solitary genius who, without any significant help from anybody, rearranged the universe. Like most fine stories that sound too good to be true, the Einstein myth is really too good to be true. The Nobel Prize-winning chemist Linus Pauling once said on a completely unrelated topic that it takes a generation before people will accept a truly new idea. Current generations, weaned on the Einstein myth, will not bear to part with it. Women and men of newer generations, not weaned on the myth, willing to investigate the evidence for themselves, and not wedded to any ideology or point of view, will approach the issue of Einstein authorship of the special theory of relativity and the formula E=mc with fresh eyes. The Einstein hoax consists of maintaining the quasi-religious belief that the phenomena associated with velocity and gravitation cannot be understood by ordinary men using their common sense. It can only be understood in terms of mathematics performed by initiates who possess the prerequisite degrees. Whether it is recognized or not, all of the essentials of a religion are present. There is a deity in the form of Dr. Einstein, who, like most of the men who have had that role thrust on them over the centuries, probably did not seek or even relish it. It has an established but unproven set of truths which were revealed by that deity. Finally, it is protected by selected defenders of the faith who, in this case, act through the peer review process to ensure that heresy in any form is never published. A primary motive for the maintaining of the Einstein hoax is rather obvious. Money. Society expends a large sum supporting this priesthood through tuition paid by parents and grants by governments and industry. The donors believe they are paying for the teaching of the young. However, that teaching is mostly done by graduate students who are seeking their own degrees. The established possessors of the necessary degrees spend most of their time in research because, not only is that activity more interesting, it serves to advance their tenure-protected careers. Should special and/or general relativity be shown to be fundamentally flawed, the careers of relativists, most cosmologists, and those working on quantum gravity and/or unified field theory will have been wasted. The publication of special relativity provided a golden opportunity for the majority of the academic community. Under the interpretations of nature provided by special relativity, the door was opened for the majority of its members who were without the talent required to understand its workings. At the same time, those with the necessary talent needed to understand reality instinctively recognized that contradictions were implicit in special relativity and could not accept the subject as it was presented. Teachers of special relativity report that a significant percentage of intelligent and mathematically skilled students cannot master the subject. The inability to accept special relativity, as presented, effectively eliminates individuals with a strong sense of reality, which by another name is called common sense, from the ranks of those who acted as advisors to PhD candidates and from the roles of those who perform the peer reviews which determine what is published in scientific journals. As a result, a selection process was gradually put in place which ensured that only material which did not threaten the validity of special and general relativity was published. Material which appeared to be a threat, no matter how powerfully presented and how intellectually and observationally valid.
Thanks for joining me. Today we are going to carry out simple experiment to measure the true distance of the Sun and by extension the Moon, stars and comets. Let's get started. It is now demonstrated that the Earth is a plane, and therefore the distance of the Sun may be readily and most accurately ascertained by the simplest possible process. The operation is one in plane trigonometry, which admits of no uncertainty and requires no modification or allowance for probable influences. The principle involved in the process may be as shown here. Let A be an object, the distance of which is desired, on the opposite side of a river. Place a rod vertically at the point C, and take a piece of strong cardboard, in the shape of a right-angled triangle, as B, C, and D. It is evident that placing the triangle to the eye, and looking along the side E, B, the line of sight D, B, H, will pass far to the left of the object A. On removing the triangle more to the right, to the position E, the line E, F, will still pass to the left of A, but on removing it again to the right, until the line of sight from L touches or falls upon the object A, it will be seen that L, A, bears the same relation to A, C, L, as D, B, does to B, C, D, in other words, the two sides of a triangle. B, C, and C, D, being equal in length, so the two lines C, A, and C, L, are equal. Hence, if the distance from L to C is measured, it will be in reality the same as the desired distance from C to A. It will be obvious that the same process applied vertically is equally certain in its results. On one occasion, in the year 1856, the author having previously delivered a course of lectures in Great Yarmouth, Norfolk, and this subject becoming very interesting to a number of his auditors, an invitation was given to meet him on the seashore, and among other observations and experiments, to measure, by the above process, the altitude of the Nelson's Monument, which stands on the beach near the sea. A piece of thick cardboard was cut in the form of a right-angled triangle, the length of the two sides being about 8 inches. A fine silken thread, with a pebble attached, constituted a plumb line, fixed with a pin to one side of the triangle, as shown at P. The purpose of this plumb line was to enable the observer to keep the triangle in a truly vertical position, just as the object of the rod C, in figure, to enable the base of the triangle to be kept in one and the same line by looking along from E and L towards C. On looking over the triangle held vertically, and one side parallel with the plumb line P, From the position A, the line of sight fell upon the point B, but on walking gradually backwards, the top of the helmet D, on the head of the figure of Britannia, which surmounts the column, was at length visible from the point C. On prolonging the line DC, to H, by means of a rod, the distance from H to the center of the monument at O, was measured, and the altitude OD, was affirmed to be the same. But of this no proof existed further than that the principle involved in the triangulation compelled it to be so. Subsequently the altitude was obtained from a work published in Yarmouth, and was found to differ only 1 inch from the altitude ascertained by the simple operation above described. The foregoing remarks and illustrations are, of course, not necessary to the mathematician, but may be useful to the general reader, showing him that plane trigonometry, carried out on the Earth's plane or horizontal surface, permits of operations which are simple and perfect in principle, and in practice fully reliable and satisfactory. The illustrations given above have reference to a fixed object, but the sun is not fixed, and therefore a modification of the process, but involving the same principle, must be adopted. Instead of the simple triangle and plumb line, already represented, an instrument with a graduated arc must be employed, and 2 observers, one at each end of a north and south baseline, must at the same moment observe the under edge of the sun as it passes the meridian, when, from the difference in the angle observed, and the known length of the baseline, the actual distance of the sun may be calculated. The following case will fully illustrate this operation, as well as its results and importance. The distance from London Bridge to the seacoast at Brighton, in a straight line, is 50 statute miles. On a given day, at 12 o'clock, the altitude of the sun, from near the water at London Bridge, was found to be 61 degrees of an arc, and at the same moment of time the altitude from the seacoast at Brighton was observed to be 64 degrees of an arc. The baseline from L to B, 50 measured statute miles, the angle at L, 61 degrees, and the angle at B, 64 degrees. In addition to the method by calculation, the distance of the under edge of the sun may be ascertained from these elements by the method called construction of case constructed, that is, the baseline from L to B represents 50 statute miles, and the line L, S, is drawn at an angle of 61 degrees, and the line B, S, at an angle of 64 degrees. Both lines are produced until they bisect or cross each other at the point S. Then, with a pair of compasses, measure the length of the baseline B, L, and see how many times the same length may be found in the line L, S, or B, S. It will be found to be 16 times, or 16 times 50 miles, equal to 800 statute miles. Then measure in the same way the vertical line D, S, and it will be found to be 700 miles. Hence it is demonstrable that the distance of the sun over that part of the earth to which it is vertical is only 700 statute miles. 85. The above method of measuring distances applies equally to the moon and stars, and it is easy to demonstrate, to place it beyond the possibility of error, so long as assumed premises are excluded, that the moon is nearer to the earth than the sun, and that all the visible luminaries in the firmament are contained within a vertical distance of 1,000 statute miles. From which it unavoidably follows that the magnitude of the sun, moon, stars, and comets is comparatively small, much smaller than the earth from which they are measured, and to which, therefore, they must of necessity be secondary and subservient. They cannot, indeed, be anything more than centers of action, throwing down light and chemical products upon the earth. With these evidence deduced through measurement and experiment, it is clear beyond any doubt that the sun is not 93 million miles away. Thank you for watching. Please drop your comment and suggestion in comment section, subscribe and share with friends if you enjoy this video. See you in next video.
The Earth. Is it really just a big ball floating in space, spinning on its axis at 1,000 miles per hour, hurtling around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour, whizzing through the Milky Way at a milk-curdling speed of over 500,000 miles per hour, and warp driving through the heaven at over 500 million miles per hour? And what about the sun? Is it really 93 million miles away and close to 1 million miles in diameter, with a circumference of nearly 3 million miles? And it's constantly illuminating half of our entire Earth's surface with the rotation of the Earth, creating our 24-hour days, our night and days? Or, shh, the Earth is flat. And maybe it's completely still, just like we experience. And maybe the sun isn't big, but is very small and very close, and not illuminating the Earth from 93 million miles, but is illuminating locally. And maybe everything, the sun, moon, and stars, are not far away, but are circling overhead relatively close. In this video, we're going to explore the latter option, and at the end, we're going to reveal startling evidence through the use of time-lapse photography that the sun cannot possibly be 93 million miles away, but is in fact very close, and is illuminating locally as it traverses our flat Earth. Oh man, and watch how this sun comes at you. Boom! I mean, come on. And that's all perspective. If you look at jet trails, Google Images, you'll see them, they start out low at the horizon, they come up overhead. Look at that thing. They come up overhead and then they go down to the horizon. Perfectly explains what the sun would do. Here it is going overhead. I love time lapse. And look at this. You can't go out and look at the sun. You can't see this stuff, except that it's on, time lapse like this. It's incredible. Now watch this thing. It's sweeping. The sun over flat Earth is doing a big circle, right? Look at this thing. See it sweeping to the right. It's like a lefty bowler. Just toss that down the alley, and there it goes, hooking into the pocket. You can see how the clouds angle down to the horizon. And shot it there. That's exactly how the sun would do on flat Earth. Okay, back to the Copernican principle, and this is what they tell us. The sun is 93 million miles away. Now, I'm going to show you evidence through sunsets that shows the sun light following the sun over the horizon, and it shrinks as it goes over. Now, there's no way it would do that if the sun is 93 million miles away. Okay, first I'm going to show you some footage from the ISS. Okay, now watch this animation. Watch this sunset. Now this is exactly, if they came to me and said, do an animation, this is how I would do it. If the sun were 93 million miles away. Just like that. Have the whole horizon fade evenly. But that's not what we see. Okay, wow, look at that. Look how the light lifts off the ground like a big wedge, or like lifting up a sheet of paper. That's incredible footage. Definitely the light's following the sun, right? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. In this video, I am going to talk to you about the magical powers or the magical world of the occultists who formed our understanding of the cosmos. Copernicus, Isaac Newton, Galileo, Kepler, and the rest. Let us now dive straight into this discussion. But before then, please remember to subscribe and click the bell icon so you will not miss any updates on this channel. Thank you. Galileo is quoted as saying that where our senses failed us, reason stepped in. However, Galileo made astrological charts for rich people. It seems throughout history, scientific geniuses such as Galileo, Newton, and others have believed in completely fantastic things, from astrology, alchemy, to straight-up magic and witchcraft. They have not only practiced, but have incorporated them into all of their widely popular theories of modernity. For example, the theory of gravity was drawn from a magical principle called the magic law of attraction, which is believed that magic is a way of attracting lovers, bringing luck, banishing evil spirits, fortune, and more. According to one witch, magic is something we use to help us get what we want or need. This bizarre idea seemed very valid to many of these so-called men of science. However, we have the benefit of hindsight today. We know that scientific principles should come from rationality and other observations that can be tested and repeated. The Big Bang Theory, gravity forming the universe, and the ever-expanding universe are all ideas that cannot be observed or repeated. They are merely theories formed from the compromised minds of men who were heavily influenced by occult doctrines. Galileo, who lived between 1564 and 1642, is held up as the paragon of rationality. He advocated a heliocentric cosmos, the idea that the sun, not the earth, is at the center of the universe. This, of course, was an idea that was rejected by the early church because of the Genesis account. However, Galileo was determined to convert all Christians to this new view of God's creation. It is from this observation that Jude writes, "For there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men turning the grace of our God into lasciviousness, and denying the only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ." Jude chapter 1 verse 4. It is proven from recorded history that Galileo was somewhat of a fortune teller. Although history records that Galileo did not believe in astrology, he nonetheless practiced it, conducting readings for wealthy clients. That is quite unscientific for a so-called man of rationality science. However, the truth is revealed in the light of a man's action. Galileo taught many medical students the act of reading astrological charts as well, and based their sources as doctors on their understanding of astrology. Galileo wasn't alone in keeping up on his science. His contemporaries, such as Kepler, conducted his own astrological studies. I am sure it is surprising to know that many of these men who were the founders of science were involved in occult practices because we only know them in the context of mathematics and rationality. However, Isaac Newton, who lived between 1642 and 1726, the founder of gravity and theories of motion, was also somewhat of a magician. John Maynard called Isaac Newton the last of the great magicians. Newton spent half of his life obsessed with alchemy. Alchemy was a transformative magic. Newton had hopes of using this magic to change metals into gold. In 1700, he was made the master over the royal mints. In his new position, he tried repeatedly to use magic to divine metals into gold. He felt, could men be so heavily involved in the occult be trusted to assimilate theories about the true nature of the world in which we live? Robert Boyle is considered the father of chemistry, yet he too dabbled into alchemy, magic. He was so committed to the alchemy cause that he fought to make alchemy legal. He was unsuccessful because alchemy was considered witchcraft. Then Tycho Brahe, who lived between 1546 and 1601, Newton and Galileo were also interested in the stars, astrology, and magic. Tycho Brahe created his own model of the universe. He had catalogued more than 1,000 stars. He also convinced everyone he was a sorcerer. He did all this from his own private sorcerer's island. Tycho Brahe was fantastically wealthy. He built multiple observatories and had a squad of astronomical assistants. Tycho uses many tricks to make himself appear to have magical powers. One author stated that he created and used tiny robots to convince the lookers that he was a sorcerer. However, he is the man who we know or whom we credit for creating one of the first conceptual drawings of our universe. This was the same man who had his nose partly sliced off in a duel and got his pet moons drunk at parties. Even though Brahe was a depraved man of the occult whose thoughts were guided by sensuality and hedonism, Brahe is widely considered, widely popular, and still respected as a founder of science. In the Western world, many grew up in an educational system which, for the most part, has regarded the development of science and knowledge as largely the product of some vague concept of Judeo-Christian belief system. This generic idea that is the Christianized nations of Europe and their colonial offshoots, which, because they had a theistic foundation which taught that a rational creator made the world in an orderly way, enjoyed an intellectual climate most preferable to scientific study and development. Such a climate produces great scientific minds, or so-called scientific minds, like Isaac Newton, Galileo, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Edison, and Albert Newton, and the rest of others. In other words, all of the geniuses we learned about in school. However, this worldwide or worldview does not hold up to a decent scrutiny of history. Instead, these men often were just the opposite. Rather than to base their scientific discoveries in rational observation, they often turn towards the occult metaphysical world for answers. Surprisingly, however, it seems that Christians within our modern-day culture were the last to know, preferably to cling to the mythology about the Christian roots of science, because it plays such a large role in their current approach to Christian apologetics. Notwithstanding, in subjects such as creationism, where so many geologists and astronomers turn to in hopes of vindicating the Genesis account, Christians completely swallow the birth of modern human secularism. However, if such Christians were willing to lay down their rose-colored glasses and give up their slanted views of scientific history in Europe, America, and the West, they would see that real science is really based in alchemy and Kabbalah. In fact, most theoretical science traces back to the occult mystic schools, rooted in what they prefer to be a religion rather than science. Another concern that Christians ought to have with respect to the root of theoretical and cosmological science is it tied to Hermetic philosophy. Towards the beginning of what we know as the Renaissance in Europe, the Europeans' interest in the historical figure of Hermes Trismegistus sheds an incredible amount of light on how ancient esoteric teachings penetrated Europe and gave rise to the period known as the Renaissance of Enlightenment and finally the scientific and industrial revolution. It is rather outstanding to learn just how highly regarded the figure of Hermes Trismegistus was. In the European Renaissance, he was considered by scholars, even St. Thomas Aquinas, to be just as literal a figure in history, but pagan Egyptian history as Moses of the Hebrew scripture. In fact, some regarded him to have the same status as Abraham. So here we have a figure in history, Hermes Trismegistus, a pagan magician from antiquity, who somehow comes to receive incredible favored treatment by European Christians, theologians, and scholars alongside Europeans, who was of course much more deeply attracted to the occult elements of this tradition. And so in the 15th century, we have Italian scholars and Catholic priest Marsilio Ficino, who had been commissioned by a wealthy Medici family to translate the works of Plato. Yet, when the Medici family suddenly came into possession of the Greek manuscript said to be the writings of the magnificent Hermes, Ficino was ordered to hold his work on Plato and translate the Hermetic text with utmost priority. The result was the work known thereafter as Corpus Hermeticum. This had far-reaching effect on Renaissance thinking. It was this work, along with the Kabbalah, that had the greatest impact on the thinking of Copernicus. Moreover, while Corpus Hermeticum contained a fair amount of more philosophical ideological content, it also contained description of outright rituals, such as how to summon astral energy from above and animate stone idols. Needless to say, it was quite deserving of the categorization of witchcraft. Another prominent figure with the rise of Copernicanism, whose Hermetic influence has been thoroughly documented and well known, is Giovanni Bruno, who first proposed that the stars are distant suns. According to Greek historians, he was born at the stake for his beliefs. Copernicus himself referred to Hermes in quotes about the sun. In the middle of all sights, the sun, enthroned in the most beautiful temple. Could we place a luminary in any better position from which he can illuminate the whole at once? He is rightly called the Lamb, the mind, the ruler of the universe, the visible God, the all-seeing. So the sun sits as upon a royal throne, ruling his children, the planet which circle around him. Clearly, these men, Copernicus, Isaac Newton, and others, were heavily influenced by the occult teachings. This man, sorcerer. Exodus chapter 22 verse 18 tells us, "Do not allow a sorcerer or a witch to live, but we have allowed them to hijack and warp the very perception that we have about the world." Sorcery uses spells, divination, and speaking to spirit, and is clearly taught against in the Bible. For example, 2 Chronicles chapter 33 verse 6, King Manasseh is condemned for his many evil practices, including sorcery and his burning of his son as an offering to the valley of Hinnom. God condemns him for practicing sorcery. The Apostle Paul lists sorcery as one of the sinful practices that mark the lives of unbelievers, when he said, "Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, and strife. All of these I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God." Galatians chapter 5 verse 19 to 21 translate the word sorcery as pharmakia, where we get our word pharmacy. In Paul's day, the word primarily means dealing in poison or drug use, or even alchemy, amulets, charms, and conjuring the power of the occult. Isaac Newton, Tycho Brahe, and other so-called scientists were quite taken with the occult. These are the same men who helped to shape our schools and doctrines about the nature of our world. We will not believe that we would not believe that our world is spinning and was formed by gravity had we not had their theories to lean on. However, can we really trust our educational system to the doctrines of these men of magic? It is no question that NASA is practicing deception. The 1969 moon landing was very suspicious. NASA has also been shown as a very deceptive organization. Most of what they give us concerning the nature of the cosmos is computer generated. Ironically, the very word NASA in itself means to deceive. Indeed, Strong's defined this word as Strong 57537, North Shore, a primitive route to lead astray, that is, mentally to delude, or morally to seduce, beguile, deceived, greatly or utterly. So, the occultists have been the ones to lead us into this new brave world of science, and most of the science that they have done is still very questionable. NASA uses CGI to make us believe that the Earth is a globe. Evolution is impossible to prove. Gravity cannot be explained. We have never been past 7 miles deep in the Earth, yet we say that the Earth has a core 4,000 miles beneath the Earth. Could all of our foundational beliefs be false and concentrated in the occult beliefs of a few men who we thought were scientists, but instead were sorcerers? We may never know until we reach heaven. However, all the evidence points to the conclusion that the real inspiration behind these men of science was not the Holy Spirit. Let us continue to expose them and take the message to those who are still asleep, so that they may wake up to the truth. Kindly drop your thoughts on these so-called men of science, whom we have now found out to be men of the occult, instead in the comment section. Please like and share this video with your friends and family members on social media and everywhere if you enjoy it. Remember to also subscribe to my channel if you are visiting for the first time, and then hit the bell icon so that you will not miss any updates. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next video. Peace.
Let's go.
Good evening and thank you for joining me. In today's video, which is a repeat of the previous video that had audio issues, I am going to once again look at Operation High Jump and the journey into Antarctica to find the dome. Now, in this presentation or in this video, I will chronicle the history of Antarctic expedition as well as demonstration of how the dome functions. Now, let's get started. Immediately after World War II, the US Navy launched the largest military operation ever down to Antarctica, called Operation High Jump. Admiral Byrd, a 33-degree Freemason, led the expedition of 30 ships and 4,700 militarized soldiers. The mission had 3 task forces that were sent out in different directions and was to last 6 to 8 months, but the fleet came back in just 6 weeks. Admiral Byrd reported UFO sightings, but that was a public relations ruse. They were really trying to find out about the electromagnetic field above the ice wall and the edge of the dome. Just several years later, the US and the Russians began firing over 49 high-altitude thermonuclear rockets up into the dome with Operation Fishbowl and Operation Dummy. Rockets went haywire and many had to be aborted as they tried to blast through the dome. Then, both the Russians and the United States signed off on a ban on any more tests of the dome as a space race, and the fake moon missions were sold to the world. Why is then Antarctica under military occupation? This mission was created on the fly. Even the ship's Admiral Byrd complained they did not know their mission.
This was right after World War II, and they even had to recommission ships in both heads for the effort, with rookie sailors and pilots who had never flown in Antarctic conditions. Why was the rush? 3 task forces went down for a 6 to 8 month mission with Russia, Britain and Norway, but yet returned in just 6 weeks. What then happened? The next year, Secretary of Navy James Foster committed suicide, and the following year, Admiral Byrd, who led all Antarctic missions, and a 33-degree Freemason is knocked off. So why? Then in 1962, both Russia and the United States set off over 40 thermonuclear devices at the dome, trying to blast through it. Then in 1963, test bombs of high nuclear devices. Kennedy announces moonshot and then was assassinated. Were they trying to find the dome? Was the journey down to find the dome? What they found was Mars' electromagnetic energy at 600 miles up, exactly where the dome is supposed to be. And in the same year, the Van Allen belts were discovered, located at the same distance of 600 miles up. This is exactly the same field that Nikola Tesla was referring to as well. Admiral Byrd was an active Freemason. He became a member of the Federal Lodge No. 1, Washington, D.C. on March 19, 1921, and affiliated with Kane Lodge No. 454, New York City, in September 18, 1928. He was a member of the National Surgeon Chapter No. 3 at Washington. He and his pilot, Baines Belchin, dropped Masonic flags on the 2 poles. Belchin also added his Shri specs. In the Antarctic expedition of 1933 and 1935, 60 of the 82 members were Freemasons, and on February 5, 1935, established First Antarctic Lodge No. 777 of the New Zealand Constitution. It seems incredible that so shortly after a war that had decimated most of Europe and crippled global economies, an expedition to Antarctica was undertaken with so much haste. It took advantage of the very first available Antarctic summer after the war, at such cost and with so much military hardware, unless the operation was absolutely essential to the security of the United States. Speaking of the state of the world, what then is hidden in Antarctica? Why would you be arrested for exploring Antarctic secret? Why did so many nations sign the Antarctic Treaty and restrict your travel south of the region? Operation Fishball was a series of high-altitude nuclear tests in 1962 that were carried out by the United States as part of the larger Operation Dominic nuclear program. According to Wikipedia, the Soviet Union's K-Project nuclear test series was a group of 5 nuclear tests conducted in 1961 to 1962. This test followed the 1961 Soviet nuclear test series and preceded the 1962 Soviet nuclear test series. The K-Project nuclear testing series were all high-altitude tests fired by missiles from the Kapustin launch site in Russia across central Kazakhstan towards the Sari Shagan test range. Has modern science discovered the phenomenon? And is the Van Allen belt part of it? Why has NASA on more than one occasion wanted to blow it up and or punch holes in it accordingly? Why has NASA on more than one occasion wanted to blow it up and or punch holes in something they already admit is here for our protection? How come Orion, NASA spacecraft, can't get through the Van Allen belt, yet we were told Apollo had no problem doing so 40 years ago? These and many more questions are left unanswered. I would like to hear your view on this in the comment section. Please also give me feedback on the entire video and the audio. Thank you for watching. This video is a repeat of a video that had a very poor audio quality, which was uploaded a few days ago. Many of you advised that I should do a repeat of the video, so here you have it. If you are here for the first time, please subscribe And as usual, keep your feedback coming. Remember to drop a thumbs up and share this video with your friends and family. Thank you for watching. Peace.
On February 26, 1947, a battle took place, in which is described by a member of the expedition, an experienced pilot called John Sanderson. A series of black flying saucer-like ships flew out of the water. So here's the question, has science discovered God? Well, Einstein didn't believe it was possible, but Stephen Hawking said it might be the greatest scientific discovery of all time. So what discovery has baffled the greatest scientific minds the past century? And why has it caused them to rethink the origin of our universe? Well, new and more powerful telescopes have unlocked mysteries about our universe never before revealed, giving us amazing new scientific insight into the origin of life. Has science discovered God? Wait a minute, hasn't science proven we don't need God to explain the universe? What is it about this discovery that is so fundamentally different? And why has it stunned the scientific world? Well, this discovery, along with what molecular biologists have learned about the sophisticated coding within DNA, have many scientists now admitting that the universe and life itself appear to be part of a grand design. One cosmologist put it this way: many scientists, when they admit their views, incline toward the design argument. Surprisingly, many scientists who are now talking about God have no religious belief whatsoever. So what are these stunning discoveries that have scientists suddenly speaking of God? Well, there are three revolutionary discoveries from the fields of astronomy and molecular biology that really stand out. 1. The universe had a beginning. The universe is just right for life. 3. DNA coding reveals intelligence. The statements leading scientists have made about these discoveries may shock you. Let's take a look. The universe had a one-time beginning. Since the dawn of civilization, man is gazed in awe at the stars, wondering what they are and how they got there. Although on a clear night the unaided human eye can see only about 6,000 stars, Hubble and other powerful telescopes reveal there are a billion stars clustered in over 100 billion galaxies. In fact, our sun is like one grain of sand amidst the world's beaches. But prior to the 20th century, the majority of scientists believed our own Milky Way galaxy was the entire universe and that only about 100 million stars existed. All scientists in the past believed that our universe never had a beginning. They believed that mass, space and energy that compose our entire universe had always existed. But in the early 20th century, astronomer Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe is expanding. Rewinding the process mathematically, he calculated that everything in the universe, including matter, energy, space and even time itself, actually had a beginning. Well, shock waves hit the scientific community. Many scientists, including Einstein, reacted negatively. In what Einstein later called the biggest blunder of my life, he fudged the equations to avoid the implication that the universe had a beginning. Well, perhaps the most vocal adversarial. The idea that the universe had a beginning was the British astronomer Sir Frederick Hoyle, who sarcastically nicknamed the creation event a Big Bang. He stubbornly held to his steady-state theory that the universe had always existed. Well, so did Einstein and other scientists, until the evidence for a beginning became overwhelming. The logical conclusion was like the proverbial elephant in the room, namely, that something or someone beyond scientific investigation must have started it all. Then finally, in 1992, the COBE satellite experiments proved that the universe really did have a one-time beginning in an incredible flash of light and energy. Although some scientists called it the moment of creation, most preferred referring to it as the Big Bang. Astronomer Robert Jastrow tries to help us imagine how it all began. The picture suggests the explosion of a cosmic hydrogen bomb. The instant in which the cosmic bomb exploded marked the birth of the universe. So the conclusion is, everything in the universe came from nothing. Science is unable to tell us what or who caused the universe to begin, but some believe it clearly points to a creator. British theorist Edward Milne wrote a mathematical treatise on relativity which concluded by saying, as to the first cause of the universe in the context of expansion, that is left to the reader to insert. But our picture is incomplete without him. Another British scientist Edmund Whittaker attributed the beginning of our universe to divine will, constituting nature from nothingness. Many scientists were struck by the parallel of a one-time creation event from nothing with the biblical creation account in Genesis 1:1. Prior to this discovery, many scientists regard the biblical account of creation from nothing as unscientific. Although he called himself an agnostic, Robert Jastrow was compelled by the evidence to admit, now we see how the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. Another similar statement came from agnostic George Smoot, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist in charge of the Kobe experiment. He put it like this: there is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. Scientists who used to scoff at the Bible's account of creation are now admitting that the biblical concept of creation from nothing has been right all along. Cosmologists who specialized in the study of the universe and its origins soon realized that a chance cosmic explosion could never bring about life any more than a nuclear bomb would unless it was precisely engineered to do so, and that meant the designer must have planned it. They began using words like super-intellect, creator, and even supreme being to describe this designer. Why is this? Because the universe is finely tuned for life. Physicists calculated that for life to exist, gravity and the other laws of physics that govern our universe needed to be intricately tuned just right, or our universe couldn't exist. For instance, did you know that if the expansion rate of the universe had been slightly weaker, gravity would have held all matter back into a big crunch? We're not talking about merely a 1 or 2% reduction in the universe's expansion rate. Stephen Hawking writes, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have elapsed before it ever reached its present size. Well, on the flip side, if the expansion rate had been a mere fraction greater than it was, all galaxies, stars and planets could never have formed and we wouldn't be here. And for life to exist, the conditions in our solar system and our own planet also need to be just right. For example, we all realize that without an atmosphere of oxygen none of us would be able to breathe, and without oxygen, water couldn't exist. Without water there would be no rainfall for our crops. Other elements such as hydrogen, nitrogen, sodium, carbon, calcium and phosphorus are also essential for life, but that alone is not all that's needed for life to exist. The size, temperature, relative proximity and chemical makeup of our planet, sun and moon also need to be just right, and there are dozens of other conditions that needed to be exquisitely fine-tuned or we wouldn't be here to think about it. The scientists who believe in God may have expected such fine-tuning, but atheists and agnostics were unable to explain the remarkable quote-unquote coincidences. The theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, an agnostic, writes, the remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. It all brings us to one question: the universe accident or miracle? But couldn't this fine-tuning be attributed to chance? After all, odds makers know that even long shots can eventually win at the racetrack, and against heavy odds, lotteries are eventually won by someone. So what are the odds against a human life existing by chance from a random explosion in cosmic history? Well, for human life to be possible from a Big Bang utterly defies the laws of probability. One astronomer calculates the odds at less than 1 chance in a trillion. In other words, it would be far easier for a blindfolded person in one try to discover one specially marked grain of sand out of all the beaches of the world. Look at it this way, the odds of one random Big Bang producing life as we know it would be like one person winning over 1,000 consecutive Mega Million-dollar lotteries after purchasing only a single ticket for each. Not very likely really. Quite impossible unless it was fixed by someone behind the scenes, which is what everyone would think, and that is what many scientists are concluding: someone behind the scenes designed and created the universe. Well, this new understanding of how miraculous human life is in our universe led the agnostic astronomer George Greenstein to ask, is it possible that suddenly, without intending to, we've stumbled upon the scientific proof of the existence of a supreme being? However, as an agnostic, Greenstein maintains his faith in science rather than a creator to ultimately explain our origins. Robert Jastrow explains why some scientists are reluctant to accept the transcendent creator. He says there is a kind of religion in science. It is the religion of a person who believes there is order and harmony in the universe. This religious faith to scientists is violated by the discovery that the world had a beginning under conditions in which the known laws of physics are not valid and as a product of forces or circumstances we cannot discover. When that happens, the scientist has lost control. If you really examine the implications, he would be traumatized. Well, it's understandable why scientists like Greenstein and Hawking seek other explanations rather than attribute our finely tuned universe to a creator. Hawking speculates that other unseen and unprovable universes may exist, increasing the odds that one of them, like ours, is perfectly fine-tuned for life. However, since his proposal is speculative and outside of verification, it can hardly be called scientific, although he's also an agnostic. British astrophysicist Paul Davies dismisses Hawking's idea as too speculative. He writes, such a belief must rest on faith rather than observation. Although Hawking continues leading the charge to explore purely scientific explanations for our origins, other scientists, including many agnostics, have acknowledged what appears to be overwhelming evidence for a creator. Astronomer Frederick Hoyle wrote a common-sense interpretation of the facts. Suggests that the super-intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. Although Einstein wasn't religious and didn't believe in a personal God, he called the genius behind the universe and intelligence of such superiority that compared with it all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. Atheist Christopher Hitchens, who spent much of his life writing and debating against the existence of God, was most perplexed by the fact that life couldn't exist if things were different by just 1 degree or 1 hair. Davies acknowledges, there is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming, but astronomy is not the only area where science has discovered evidence for design. There is another discovery: DNA, the language of life, as recent as 1953. Molecular biologists discovered intricately complex design in the microscopic world of DNA. This tiny molecule has been called the brains behind each cell in our body as well as every other living thing. Yet the more they discover about DNA, the more amazed they are at the brilliance behind it. Scientists who believe the material world is all that exists, like Richard Dawkins, argued DNA evolved by natural selection without a creator, yet even most ardent evolutionists admit that the origin of DNA's intricate complexity is unexplainable. The DNA's intricate complexity caused its co-discoverer Francis Crick to believe that it could never have originated on Earth naturally. Crick and evolutionists believe life is too complex to have originated on Earth and must have come from outer space. He wrote, an honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us now could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to almost be a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have had to have been satisfied to get it going. The coding behind DNA reveals such intelligence that it staggers the imagination. A mere pinhead volume of DNA contains information equivalent to a stack of paperback books that would encircle the Earth 5,000 times, and DNA operates like a language with its own extremely complex software code. Microsoft founder Bill Gates says that the software of DNA is far more complex than any software we have ever developed. Richard Dawkins and other evolutionary biologists believe that all this complexity originated through natural selection. Yet as Crick, a Nobel Prize winner, remarked, natural selection could never have produced the first molecule. Many scientists believe that decoding within the DNA molecule points to an intelligence far exceeding what could have occurred by natural causes. In the early 21st century, noted atheist Anthony Flew's lifelong unbelief came to an abrupt end when he studied the remarkable intelligence behind DNA. Flew explains what changed his position. What I think the DNA material has done is to show that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements together. The enormous complexity by which the results were achieved looked to me like the work of intelligence. It now seems to me that the finding of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. Although Flew is not a Christian, he admitted that the software behind DNA is far too complex to have originated without a designer. All this scientific evidence leads us to honestly consider that life and the universe have the fingerprints of a creator. Are scientists now convinced that a creator has left his fingerprints on the universe? Although many scientists are still bent on squeezing God out of the universe, most recognize the religious implications of these new discoveries. In his book, The Grand Design, Stephen Hawking, who doesn't believe in a personal God, attempts to explain why the universe doesn't need God. Yet when faced with the evidence, even Hawking has also admitted there must be religious overtones, but I think most scientists prefer to shy away from the religious side of it. As an agnostic, world-renowned astronomer, Robert Jastrow had no Christian agenda behind his conclusions. However, he freely acknowledges the compelling case for a creator. He writes of the shock and despair experienced by scientists who thought they had squeezed God out of their world. These are his words for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason. The story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak, and as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. So, what if after all there is a creator? If there is a super-intelligent creator, the question arises, what is he like? Is he just some cosmic force like in Star Wars, or is he a personal being like us? Well, since we're personal and relational beings, wouldn't the one who created us also be personal and relational? Many scientists like Arthur Al-Shabaab, professor of physics at Stanford University and winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics, believed that these new discoveries provide compelling evidence for a personal God. He writes, "It seems to me that when confronted with the marvels of life in the universe, one must ask why and not just how. The only possible answers are religious. I find a need for God in the universe and in my own life. If God is personal, and since he has given us the ability to communicate, wouldn't we expect him to communicate with us and let us know why we are here?" As we've seen, science is unable to answer questions about God and the purpose for life. However, since the Bible was right about creation from nothing, might it also be trustworthy regarding God, life and purpose? The 2,000 years ago a man set foot on our planet who claimed to have the answer to life. Although his time on Earth was brief, his impact changed the world and is still felt today. His name is Jesus Christ. The eyewitnesses to Jesus Christ tell us that he continually demonstrated creative power over nature's laws. They tell us he was wise, humble and compassionate. He healed the lame, deaf and blind. He stopped raging storms instantly. It created food. Nation began, for it was through him that everything was made, with her spiritual or material seen or you. Then it was necessary for him to rise from the dead so that we too could have life after death. As the creator, Jesus certainly would have power over life and death, and those closest to him claimed they saw him alive after he died and was buried for 3 days. If they were wrong, then Christianity has been founded upon a lie, but if they were right, such a miracle would substantiate all Jesus said about God himself and us. But must we take the resurrection of Jesus Christ by faith alone, or is there solid historical evidence? Several skeptics began investigations into the historical record to prove the resurrection account false. What did they discover? Air your views and comment, subscribe and share.